when the Xie family was wrongfully imprisoned on false charges, I, as Xie Yaro's betrothed who had not yet entered his household, rolled across a bed of nails and struck the imperial appeal drum to clear their names of the unjust accusations. Afterward, Xie Yaro kept his promise and married me. I managed the household for him, bore him 2 children, but before long, I was confined to my sickbed, wasting away, yet on my deathbed. He threw a letter of divorce in my face and forced our 2 young children to kneel before Shenjiwan's memorial tablet and call her mother. I could have married Wanwan, he spat, but you just had to meddle unnecessarily, condemning her to a lonely, tragic death. With bitter resentment, I drew my last breath. When I opened my eyes again, I had somehow returned to the very day the Xie family was arrested and thrown into prison. The wind of February still carried a faint chill. I sat quietly by the window, staring dazedly at the bright-eyed young girl reflected in the bronze mirror, my mind still muddled by the overwhelming grief of my past life. My maid, Zhua, hurried over flustered, a food box in her hands. "Miss, it's terrible news." Her face was ashen with panic as she blurted out the news she had heard in a rush, like spilling a bag of beans. I passed through the front courtyard just now and saw all the masters of the Xie family being taken away by imperial guards. It seems they've committed some unspeakable crime. What do you think? Should we cut ties with them and return to Yunju? I'm afraid you'll be implicated in this mess. Hearing these words, I finally felt a glimmer of reality in my second chance at life. In my past life, Zhua had urged me to do the same, but I had refused to stand idly by, stubbornly wading into the Xie family's troubles. It was all because my mother, on her deathbed, had been unable to rest easy. She had sent me to the capital with a marriage contract in hand. One purpose was to seek shelter, and the other was to find my father, whose identity had always been a mystery to me. She had thought that Mistress Xie, her childhood bosom friend, would surely look after the daughter of an old friend, whether the marriage came to pass or not. Furthermore, she had once done Mistress Xie a great kindness. Little did my mother know, and little did I know back then, that ingratitude was a trait that ran in the blood. Naturally, Mistress Xie had no desire to let her promising legitimate son marry a penniless orphan, yet she was also unwilling to part with my substantial dowry. So she let me take up residence in a remote, dilapidated courtyard of the Xie mansion, occasionally extorting money from me here and there, while claiming she would help me inquire about my father's whereabouts. In my naive youth, I had been too innocent to see through their schemes, and I had been utterly grateful to the Xie family. Later, when the tree fell, the monkeys scattered. When Prefect Xie of Jingzhou was framed for colluding with the enemy and betraying the country, and the entire family was thrown into prison, all their former in-laws shunned them like the plague. It was I who rushed around tirelessly, spending money to bribe officials up and down, sparing them from being tortured. It was also I who had gone through countless hardships to gather evidence, rolling across the bed of nails and striking the imperial appeal drum to clear the Xie family of their false charges. I had only met Xie Yaro twice, separated by a screen each time. I had never felt any deep affection for him, but according to the laws of the time, only relatives of the accused were permitted to strike the imperial appeal drum. I had had no choice but to act in my capacity as Xie Yaro's betrothed. Yet he had thought I had resorted to underhanded means just to marry him, and thus he had hated me to the core. The agony of rolling across that bed of nails had seared itself deep into my bones. Even after all those years, I could still vividly recall how my clothes had been soaked through with blood that day. The sharp nails had pierced my flesh and blood, the pain so excruciating that my tongue had tasted bitter. Ever since then, I had been afflicted with chronic blood deficiency. If Xie Yaro had never liked me, he could have simply said so. I would have returned to Yunju without hesitation. I would never have clung to him relentlessly. But instead, he had married me to safeguard his reputation. then blamed me entirely for the death of his beloved, claiming I had meddled unnecessarily. He had made sure I knew no peace, either in life or in death. Fortunately, I had been given a second chance. In this life, I would cast aside my useless kindness and watch with cold indifference to see how Xie Yarrow would manage to escape from prison on his own. With that thought, I took out a stack of silver notes and instructed Zhua, "You're right, Zhua, we must leave the Xie mansion at once. This place is no longer safe for us to stay. Go find a nice courtyard and buy it for us." "Yes, miss." Zhua's eyes lit up with relief, and she huffed indignantly, "If you ask me, you should have left this shabby place long ago. The roof of this courtyard has so many holes in it, even the beggars outside wouldn't deign to live here." I smiled faintly and said nothing. Though her words were somewhat exaggerated, they perfectly reflected the truth. Mistress Xie had never truly regarded me as anything more than a distant relative come to sponge off them. If she had really intended to honor the marriage contract, she would never have treated me with such contempt and neglect. As expected, the Xie mansion was already thrown into utter chaos. Most of the servants were packing their bags, ready to flee at a moment's notice. Zhua rented a carriage, and we were busy loading our luggage onto it when an unexpected guest arrived. The woman was dressed in plain white mourning clothes, standing tall and graceful. Her pair of autumn water eyes brimming with unshed tears, as if she had 1,000 words to say yet held them back. It was none other than Shen Jiwan, Xie Yarrow's cousin, the woman he had never stopped pining for in my past life. "Sister Jiang, are you leaving too?" I was momentarily stunned, unable to recall for a moment how she had died in my past life. "What kind of question is that, Miss Shen?" I asked her coolly. "Are you also guilty of colluding with the enemy and betraying the country?" The look of shocked disbelief crossed Shen Jiwan's delicate features. "Of course not, Sister Jiang. Don't speak such nonsense. If you're not," I retorted, "then what are you still doing here?" I brushed the dust off the hem of my skirt, not bothering to exchange another word with her, and turned to step onto the stool to climb into the carriage, but Shen Jiwan grew anxious. She stepped forward and grabbed the sleeve of my robe, her voice urgent. "You have a marriage contract with my cousin. How can you stand by and do nothing to help him in his time of need?" I let out a soft, disdainful scoff. "The Xie family never sent any matchmakers or betrothal gifts to my home. What marriage contract are you talking about? Furthermore, Mistress Xie is a member of the Shen clan, is she not? If even the Shen family refuses to lift a finger to help, then what business is it of mine to meddle in their affairs? If I had known earlier that the Xie family were such a bunch of ungrateful traitors, I would rather have lived in a broken temple under the bridge than ever set foot in their mansion. Let her try to take credit for my efforts. What audacity!" Shen Jiwan's face turned a mottled shade of green and white, and she was left tongue-tied, unable to come up with a single retort. She could only watch me leave. Burning with bitter resentment, the new courtyard we bought was located in the 6th lane of East Street. It was very close to the Imperial Academy, though the land price was high. The area was patrolled by the Imperial Guards, making it far safer than other parts of the capital. My mother had left me an extremely generous dowry, one that would have been enough to last me several lifetimes. Watching Zhua bustling about the new courtyard like a busy little bee, my cold, hard heart softened slightly. In my past life, I had failed myself, and I had failed her too. When I had been gravely ill, Xie Yarrow had refused to call a physician to treat me, sneering coldly instead. "Wanwan died because of you. You do well to hurry up and go down to the underworld to atone for your sins." It was Zhua who had risked her life to sneak out and buy medicine from the clinic, allowing me to cling to life for a little while longer. Yet this kind, loyal girl had ended up being beaten to death by Xie Yarrow's men right before my eyes. Her body reduced to a bloody pulp. Miss," her cheerful voice pulled me back from my dark thoughts. Zhua pointed excitedly at a portrait hanging in the study. "Look, The person in this painting looks just like you. I lifted my eyes, and what I saw left me too stunned to speak. The portrait was framed with bamboo and hung on the wall. The woman in the painting had bright, intelligent eyes and a face that was the spitting image of me now. But how could there be a portrait of me here? Find out who lived in this courtyard before us, I instructed her. Zhua nodded eagerly and hurried off to make inquiries. While she was gone, I did not forget to keep tabs on the Xie family's situation in prison. The members of the Xie family had relied on the fact that the eldest Miss Xie was a prince's consort. When they first entered the prison, they had been completely unaware of the gravity of their predicament. Acting arrogant and haughty, the refined prefect Xie had even demanded a mirror to groom himself. But it had not taken long for them to taste the bitter fruits of their misfortune. The daily meals served to them were spoiled and rotten, the water stank to high heaven, and if any of them so much as raised their voices a little too loud, the head jailer would lash them mercilessly with a whip soaked in salt. "Be grateful you're getting to eat at all," the jailer would snarl. "Do you really think you're still high and mighty nobles?" Word had it that Xie Yarou had taken a lash to the back. And that very night, he had come down with a raging fever, muttering deliriously all night long, "I am the Grand Secretary of the court," and other such nonsense. Everyone else had thought he had lost his mind from the fever, but my heart sank like a stone, because in my past life, before I died, Xie Yarou really had risen to the position of Grand Secretary, the most powerful minister in the imperial court. It did not take long for Shen Jiwan to come to my door again. She seemed to have sensed my impatience with her, for she cut straight to the chase the moment she stepped inside. "Sister Jiang, I'm here to pass along a message. My aunt says she has some information about your father. She asks that you come to the prison to see her." I had no desire to pay any attention to her, but finding my father had long since become an obsession, not just for myself, but also for my mother, who had died with that regret weighing heavily on her heart. After a moment's hesitation, I agreed. "I will go visit Mistress Xie." A faint smile tugged at the corners of Shen Jiwan's lips when she heard my answer. She touched the gold hairpin atop her head, then put on her veil and took her leave, as if a weighty matter had been settled in her heart. How odd, I thought to myself. The clothes she was wearing were old and faded to a pale white. Where had she gotten such a stylish, new gold hairpin? I tapped my fingers lightly on the wooden table, tucking the question away in the back of my mind, then rose to head for the Dali Temple prison. As the saying goes, the devils are hard to deal with. To become the head jailer of Dali Temple prison, a man had to have some skills up his sleeve, but as long as you filled his pockets with silver, he would not trouble you unduly. "You may stay for half an incense stick's time, young lady. Do not break the rules," the head jailer warned me, casting a glance at my empty sleeves. He took me for just another relative come to visit a prisoner. "Aren't you going to bring them some food or clothes? That won't cost you extra." I waved my hand dismissively, my expression filled with righteous indignation. "No need. Traitors like the Xie family who collude with the enemy don't deserve to eat. Our grain would be better saved for the soldiers guarding the border." The head jailer shot me an appreciative glance at my words. In the dim, murky dungeon, I followed closely behind him. Step by step, from far away, I heard that voice, familiar, like it had seeped into my very bones. "Yarou, are you truly certain that Jiang Ningyue can get us out of this mess?" "Rest assured, mother, as long as she is willing to strike the imperial appeal drum, the Xie family will be safe and sound." "But," Mistress Xie hesitated, her voice trembling with worry, "I've heard that striking the imperial appeal drum requires rolling across a bed of nails. It's a near-death ordeal." "Why would she ever agree to that?" I halted my footsteps, a sardonic smile tugging at the corners of my lips. So they were not oblivious to my sacrifices after all. It was simply that pain never truly registered until it was their own flesh and blood suffering through the thick dungeon walls. Xie Yarou's voice sounded even colder. more callous than I remembered. Jiang Ningyue loves me deeply. She will never refuse me. At worst, I'll promise to marry her. That should seal the deal. Heaven help us. Mistress Xie sighed mournfully. What a sacrifice for my poor son to make. The head jailer slammed his palm against his thigh, letting out a low whistle of indignation. Damn, what a scheming bastard. I feel sorry for whichever poor girl has the misfortune of falling for him. I cupped my hands in a faint salute. My voice soft as a mosquito's buzz. Unfortunately for me, that poor girl is none other than myself. In the faint, flickering light of the torches, the head jailer's eyes nearly popped out of his head. He kicked at a rat scurrying past his feet, then let out an awkward laugh. Ah, what a bright full moon we have tonight. Xie Yarou never expected to see me there. He was leaning weakly against the cold blue stone wall, his pale, gaunt face flushed with a sickly crimson hue. One glance was all it took for me to know this scoundrel had been reborn too. Cough, cough. He froze for a split second, then quickly covered his mouth with his sleeve and called out my name, his voice dripping with feigned tenderness. Ningyue. I swallowed the sudden urge to retch, nodding slightly in response, my face a mask of indifference. To be fair, all the members of the Xie family were blessed with decent looks, but after days locked up in the dungeon without a proper wash, with fleas crawling through their messy black hair, whatever good looks they had left were long gone. It was far better to leave some things to the imagination. The clinking of iron chains echoed through the damp dungeon. Prefect Xie pressed his face against the prison bars. His brows furrowed into a deep frown as he asked me plaintively, Nisu, did you bring a mirror and a comb with you? He had always been a man of refined tastes. Only spring water would do for his tea. Only silk for his robes. He had squandered my dowry recklessly, yet never once had he spoken a single word of fairness on my behalf. The cell was lit by cheap charcoal, thick plumes of acrid smoke filling the air and choking everyone inside. It was Mistress Xie who had traded her last jade hairpin to buy it. The dungeon was bitterly cold in winter, and she feared her only son would not survive the harsh conditions, that he would die and depart for the Western paradise. Meanwhile, Prefect Xie, the very man who had gotten them into this mess, cared only about his tangled hair and his precious reputation, just as I cared only about one thing. When the executioner's axe would finally fall upon the necks of the Xie family, Mistress Xie reached out and took my wrist in her cold, clammy hand, prattling on and on about how deep her friendship with my mother had been in their youth. All I could think was how icy her fingers felt, cold. Just like the winter nights in my past life when she had forced me to tend to her illness day and night, drawing my blood to use as medicine. I grew tired of listening to her meaningless chatter. Auntie, what did you summon me here to discuss? I asked bluntly. And what information do you have about my father? Be specific. Mistress Xie's words died abruptly on her lips, her kindly face twisted into an ugly sneer of disdain, completely out of place given their current predicament. Didn't your mother ever teach you any manners? You should never interrupt your elders when they are. Xie Yarou cut her off. Mother, let me talk to Ningyue. He coughed twice more, then fixed his gaze on me, his eyes brimming with that familiar, sickly sweet tenderness. I asked you to come here to talk about our marriage. You are a good, kind girl. I never should have kept you waiting this long. And yet I cannot bear the thought of you marrying another man. You are so easy to fool. If you do not mind waiting a little longer, once I am released from prison, I will marry you properly in a grand sedan chair carried by 8 men. Will you accept? So now you must work hard to save me. But there is one thing I must tell you in advance. My cousin has sacrificed so much for me over the years. I intend to take her as my secondary wife. When that day comes, I hope you will not make things difficult for her. There is no time to waste in striking the imperial appeal drum. Once you have found the evidence to clear our names, you must go at once. I listened to him speak, his tone so matter-of-fact, so entitled, and I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that cut through the dungeon air. I pulled the thin marriage contract out from my bosom, tore it clean in half, and threw the pieces directly in his face. The paper hit his skin with a soft, dull thud, each fragment as sharp as a blade to his pride. Mind, I mind more than you could ever know, I spat, my voice ringing with icy fury. What decent girl would ever marry a traitorous scoundrel who colludes with the enemy and betrays his country? Do I, Jiang Ningyue, look like someone who collects other people's garbage? A man of honor would have the decency to hang himself from a rafter long ago and end his miserable life, sparing himself further shame and preserving what little reputation he has left. If I were you, that is exactly what I would do. The head jailer clapped his hands loudly in approval. Well said. What audacity, he really thinks he can get away with anything. Xie Yaro had never imagined such harsh, cutting words would ever leave my lips. He clenched his prison robes tightly in his fists, his face turning a livid shade of green as he struggled to suppress the rage blazing in his eyes. Do you not care about our feelings for each other at all? After everything we've been through? Not even an ounce, I replied flatly. Mistress Xie opened her mouth to hurl insults at me, but Prefect Xie quickly clamped a hand over her mouth, silencing her before she could speak. I brushed the dust off my sleeves, feigning indifference. Our half an incense stick's time is almost up. If there is nothing else, I shall take my leave now. Xie Yaro's eyes fluttered shut for a moment, then he finally relented, calling out to me in a desperate voice, "What about your father? Do you not want to know about him anymore?" There it was. He always knew exactly how to hit me where it hurt the most. In my past life, it had been our 2 children. What would it be in this life? I stopped and turned to look at him, nodding my head slowly, my voice earnest. "Of course I do." "Then help me," he said quickly, his eyes lighting up with hope. "There is a letter hidden in my father's study. Bring it to the Vice Minister of Dali Temple, and I will tell you everything I know about your father." He raised 4 fingers to the sky, swearing solemnly, "If you do not believe me, I swear on my life if I speak a single lie, may I be struck down by thunder and lightning." As if on cue, a torrential downpour suddenly began to lash against the dungeon windows. A bolt of lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening clap of thunder that shook the very walls and sent a shiver down everyone's spine. That letter, it was the key piece of evidence in this entire treason case. It bore the signature of the real culprit. The incompetent Prefect Xie was nothing more than a scapegoat. I waved him over, stepping into a dark, empty corner where no one else could hear us. A faint, sickly stench of decay seemed to emanate from Xie Yaro's very pores. "You know that letter you're talking about?" I tilted my head to the side, making sure he could hear every cruel word I spoke. "The day I came back to this life, the very day the Xie family was arrested, I burned every last one of them to ashes. If saving the Xie family meant trading my father's life for theirs, then daughter as I was, I would sooner believe my father was dead than let that happen." With that, I clapped my hands together and called out to the head jailer, "Let's go." Behind me, that once handsome face twisted into a mask of pure horror and disbelief. Xie Yaro's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the ground in a heap. Amidst the panicked cries of his family, he stared blankly at the ceiling, his lips moving faintly as he whispered 2 words over and over again, "It's over." Later, according to my unlikely friend head jailer Liang, Master Xie was not one to give up easily. He tried to feed Shen Jiwan the exact same empty promises, hoping to persuade her to roll across the bed of nails and strike the imperial appeal drum in my stead. But Shen Jiwan was no fool either. Whether it was guilt or simple self-preservation that motivated her, she took whatever money he managed to scrape together and then vanished without a trace, never to be seen by the Xie family again. With no one to speak up for them, their guilty verdict was handed down quickly. All the male members of the Xie clan's direct line were sentenced to death by beheading in the autumn. while the women were condemned to a life of hard labor in the imperial palace's laundry yards. On the day of their execution, I made a special trip to watch, bringing Zhua along with me. The common people loved a good spectacle. I pushed my way through the crowd, tossing copper coins to the ground as I went. "Make way, please, make way for me," as expected. Everyone immediately scrambled to pick up the money, clearing a path for me in an instant. On the execution ground, the members of the Xie family knelt in a row, black cloth bags pulled over their heads to hide their faces. Were they innocent? Not in the slightest. Most of the Xie clan's young men had long been guilty of extorting money from the common people and abducting innocent women. In my past life, when I had been managing the household accounts, I had discovered tens of thousands of mu of unaccounted-for private farmland. The tenant farmers who toiled day and night on that land were allowed to keep a mere tenth of the grain they harvested. The other 9/10 were seized to feed the gluttonous Xie family's lavish lifestyle. When I had suggested to Mistress Xie that we reduce the rent and treat the farmers more fairly, she had flown into a rage, screaming that I was nothing but a merchant's daughter who knew nothing about running a noble household. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and a light drizzle began to fall. The executioner raised his axe and brought it down in one swift, clean motion. Round heads tumbled to the ground, rolling across the muddy execution platform, rainwater mixed with blood, forming a meandering stream that snaked its way through the crowd like the hatred in my heart, finally pouring out. I made my way to the spot where Xie Yarrow was supposed to kneel, staring intently, determined to see his death with my own eyes. But when one of the heads rolled to a stop right at my feet, my heart skipped a beat. It was not him. This was not Xie Yarrow. We had been husband and wife for years. I knew every inch of his body like the back of my hand. There should have been a faint blue birthmark at the base of his neck. I pulled my veil down over my face, letting the raindrops patter against my shoulders, my cloth shoes soaked through and sticking uncomfortably to my feet as I walked away, my mind filled with dark, troubling thoughts. "Young lady," a clear, crisp voice suddenly sounded beside my ear. Someone pressed an oilpaper umbrella into my hands, their tone gentle and concerned. "You should go home now, before you catch a cold in this rain." I could not see his face clearly, but I noticed a bright red cinnabar mole on his wrist. His fingers long and slender with well-defined knuckles. He ran off into the crowd before I could thank him. A moment later, Zhua emerged from a nearby shop, holding an umbrella over her head as she hurried over to me, stamping her foot in frustration. "Miss, why are you out in the rain again?" "Silly Zhua," I sighed, opening the umbrella he had given me. "Your mistress has a lot on her mind right now." Rainwater had a way of clearing one's head. Xie Yarrow was a man with a long memory and a grudge to match, clever, cunning, like a venomous snake lying in wait in the shadows. And to make matters worse, he had all the memories of his past life to guide him. I would never be able to rest easy until I saw him dead with my own eyes. I needed to figure out who had helped him escape from prison. Zhua knew better than to argue with me when I was like this. She simply nodded and hurried back to the courtyard to prepare a pot of ginger soup to ward off the cold. When we returned to our new home, however, an unexpected guest was waiting for us at the gate. He was a tall, imposing man dressed in the official robes of a scholar from the Imperial Academy. His pair of phoenix eyes slightly slanted upwards, his gaze bright and sharp. He raised his hand, hesitating for a moment, as if unsure whether to knock on the door or not. Zhua planted her hands firmly on her hips and marched forward, shouting indignantly, "Who are you, you rogue? How dare you loiter around my young lady's house?" The man's face turned bright red with embarrassment. He quickly cupped his hands in a polite salute, the red cinnabar mole on his wrist glinting faintly in the light. My apologies. I did not mean to disturb you. My surname is He. I was the previous tenant of this courtyard." I left in such a hurry to go on a study tour that I accidentally left a portrait behind. I was wondering if you might have seen it. That portrait means the world to me. I would be happy to pay whatever price you ask to get it back." I lifted my veil, revealing my face, and smiled slowly at him, holding out the oil paper umbrella he had given me earlier. "I'm afraid I haven't seen any portrait," I said, "but I do have an umbrella here. Would you like it back?" Yu Cheng stood frozen in place, his eyes wide and empty, the tips of his ears turning bright red as he stammered out my name, his voice trembling slightly. "Jie Jiang, Mistress Jiang." I still had a vague impression of Yu Cheng. After all, he had a face that was truly easy on the eyes. Years ago, on my journey from Yunju to the capital, a severe flood had broken out. I had ordered the boatman to fish him out of the raging waters and take him aboard my vessel. Back then, I had saved quite a few lives, and he had been just one of them. I had never imagined we would meet again, let alone that this man had secretly kept a portrait of me. The rain was falling harder and harder. I invited him into the courtyard, asking him to take shelter under the eaves for the time being. "Ginger soup's ready." The little maid brought out a large steaming bowl of ginger soup and set it in front of me, then stood off to the side, glaring at Yu Cheng like a watchdog guarding its territory. The rough-handed old maid in the courtyard was sweeping up fallen leaves. The new cook we had hired was quite skilled at her craft. I took a sip of the sweet brown sugar ginger soup, then pushed the pink porcelain teapot on the table toward him. "Help yourself to some tea, Mr. He. Thank you for forgiving my presumptuousness, Mistress Jiang." Yu Cheng poured himself a cup of cold tea, then began to explain awkwardly, his voice trailing off. "You saved my life. After we parted ways in Tongju, I secretly painted this portrait of you just so I could find you again." If his face had not been so flushed, and if he had not been squirming in his seat like he was sitting on pins and needles, I might have believed him. But sometimes, the truth was not that important. These days, I had no desire to win people over with kindness. I only wanted to reap the fruits of my efforts directly. "Have you been well these past few years, sir?" Yu Cheng nodded. "Thanks to your act of kindness that day, I was able to sit for the provincial examination later and gain admission to the Imperial Academy to study." He then asked, "What about you? Have you managed to find your father's whereabouts?" I shook my head, my face clouding over with sorrow. That damned Xie Yao, he must have known something about my father in his past life. The thought of it made my desire to kill him burn even hotter in my chest. Unforgivable. Unforgivable. Father left very few clues behind. All I know is that his surname is Wen, and he was a merchant in the capital. I paused for a moment, holding up my hand to gesture at my height. Mother said he was about this tall, and even more handsome than the most renowned courtesans in the land. The man watched my gesture, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his beautiful phoenix eyes. Unlike Xie Yao, who was always so reserved and taciturn, Yu Cheng flashed a bright smile, revealing a set of white teeth, and tapped the table lightly with his fingers. "What a coincidence. I have a classmate at the academy whose surname is Wen. He is a man of extraordinary grace and bearing, and his family has been in the merchant trade for generations. It's possible he might be related to your father." What? I had not expected such an unexpected stroke of luck. I struggled to contain my excitement and asked Yu Cheng for his classmate's name. Yu Cheng told me that this man was a rather cold and aloof person, who dedicated himself entirely to his studies and rarely interacted with others. It was unlikely that I would ever run into him outside the Imperial Academy, and it was extremely difficult for outsiders to gain entry without official permission. "Do not worry, mistress, I will do my utmost to help you find out more about him." The rain had stopped at some point without my noticing. The banana leaves in the courtyard hung limp and dripping, pooling water on the ground beneath them. The sky was beginning to lighten with the faint glow of dawn, and the sound of the night watchman's drum could be heard in the distance. I did not respond to his promise, but simply smiled and said, "It is getting late. You should head back now, mister." Experience had taught me a harsh lesson. Trusting the words of men was a surefire way to get hurt sooner or later. From that day onward, I kept myself busy. There was a proper way for officials to do things, and a sneaky way for common folk to get by, in the capital. There was a place that specialized in selling information, known as the Know It All Pavilion. It happened to be a rest day, and the people at the Know It All Pavilion had not been eager to take on my business at first, but I had slapped down 1,000 taels of gold, instantly making me their most honored guest. I bought 3 pieces of information from them. My father's whereabouts remained a mystery for the time being. Xie Yarrow had been spirited away from the Dali Temple prison in a brazen switch-up, and even the Know It All Pavilion spies dared not stick their noses into the inner workings of the Dali Temple, so I had settled for second best, asking instead for Shen Jiwan's current address and a way to get into the Imperial Academy. Xie Yarrow would definitely not be able to resist going to see Shen Jiwan. She was the woman he had pined for 2 lifetimes. After all, impressed by my generous spending, they had generously forged an identity for me, that of a cook at the Imperial Academy. The students have been complaining non-stop that the food in the Academy cafeteria is inedible, they had explained. The Academy director has asked us to find a cook with a clean family background to take over the kitchen. I also asked them one last thing, whether He Yuqing's appearance in my life had been a mere coincidence, or something arranged by someone. It had been a long time since I had last cooked. In my past life, shortly after my wedding, I had specially hired an imperial chef to come to the mansion and teach me how to cook, hoping to grow closer to my new husband through this shared activity. Yet Xie Yarrow had only sneered at me, complaining that my movements were too clumsy and my hands were not delicate enough. He had been endlessly critical of me as a person, but he had never once found fault with the food I cooked. The gatekeeper led me into the Imperial Academy cafeteria. The place was almost empty, and in the kitchen, an old cook with 1 foot in the grave was sitting there dozing off. According to the gatekeeper, he was the Academy director's father and had quite a powerful backing. An old maid was also there, picking over vegetables. As she worked, she called out to the sleeping cook, "What are we making for lunch today?" The old cook propped his chin up in his hands, snoring loudly. He smacked his lips and mumbled, "Stewed chicken with oranges, stuffed bitter melon with bananas." He then turned to the maid, asking, "Which one do you think is better?" I thought neither of them sounded edible at all. Aunt Xiao, the old maid, looked at me as if I were a godsend. "Oh, you must be the new cook they hired." She pushed me toward the stove with a wide smile, then shouted at the old cook, "Old Wen, you can take the day off today and let this young lady give it a try." The old cook had no objections. His eyes, which were clouded with the weight of years, flickered slightly when he looked at my face, as if he were seeing someone from the past through me. "All right then, I'll be here to test your dishes and give you pointers." I rolled up my sleeves and got to work, chopping and frying the ingredients with skillful, efficient movements. Soon, a rich, mouth-watering aroma began to waft out of the kitchen. The students poured into the cafeteria one after another, their faces filled with surprise and delight. He Yuqing was among them, staring at me in stunned silence. I pressed my index finger to my lips, signaling him to keep quiet, then ladled a huge spoonful of food onto his plate. "Shesh, this is my way of buying your silence." "Thank you," He Yuqing replied. He was tall, and he leaned down closer to me, speaking in a soft, cautious voice. The student standing third in line behind me, the one wearing the purple academy uniform, she is the person you are looking for, a female student. I finally noticed that amidst the sea of students dressed in the standard cyan uniforms, there was a small group of students wearing eye-catching purple robes. They had their long black hair tied up high on their heads, holding books and reciting passages aloud. radiating vitality and energy. They were completely different from the sheltered, meek women I had met in the inner courtyards of noble families. Aunt Xiao noticed my gaze and kindly explained, "Thanks to the enlightenment of Empress Qiansheng, talented young ladies are now allowed to attend the academy and sit for the imperial examinations to become officials. Although they would not be appointed to high-ranking positions in important government departments, it was still a path to a better future for them." I was quite astonished. I had lived 2 lifetimes and had never heard of such a thing before. He Yucheng had not lied to me. His classmate Miss Wen was indeed a woman of remarkable poise and elegance. Her features were as delicate as a painting, and she carried herself with an air of cool detachment. Even the eldest Miss Xie, whose beauty had earned her the position of a prince's consort, paled in comparison to her, and, as expected, she also seemed difficult to approach. I watched as she walked up to the food counter, pressing her lips together in a soft, hesitant voice. "Mistress, could I please have an extra scoop of rice?" Thanks to my excellent cooking skills, I quickly won over the stomachs of the many students in the academy, and with that, I also gained their friendship and trust. The character Heng in her name meant fine jade. To those who knew her well, Wen Heng was actually a very talkative girl. She could talk endlessly about astronomy and philosophy, which made for a striking contrast with her quiet, aloof exterior. "Ningyue, I'm so glad you came. My grandfather has poor eyesight and often mistakes sugar for salt when he cooks. His food is so terrible that only someone with an iron stomach could stomach it." When she heard that I was looking for my biological father, she told me regretfully that in the previous generation of the Wen family, her father, the academy director, had been the only son. She had been born when her parents were already quite old. In fact, Director Wen was already quite advanced in years, and his age did not match up with my father's. "But I felt an instant connection to you the moment I saw you," she added. "My aunt is the one who manages the family's business affairs. Could it be that—" I cut her off before her imagination could run wild, then excused myself, feeling disappointed. But it was not a total loss. I had not found my father, but I had gained a close friend instead. When the next rest day came around, I gathered a group of burly bodyguards and marched over to Shen Jiwan's residence in a formidable show of force. The Shen family was not a prominent one. In Tongju, they were a family of scholars and farmers that had long since fallen on hard times. Otherwise, they would never have sent Shen Jiwan to live in the Xie mansion, hoping she could marry well and climb the social ladder. Shen Jiwan had initially set her sights on her cousin Xie Yao, but as soon as the Xie family got into trouble, she had taken all the money she could get her hands on and cut off all ties with them without a second thought. When I found her, she was being chased by a group of men dressed in black. She was huddled inside a large wine vat, trembling like a leaf, her face as white as a sheet from fear, perhaps not wanting to stir up any more trouble. The black-clad assassins immediately chose to retreat when they saw our large group approaching. The young woman in the vat had her long hair soaked through, her body reeking of wine, and her clothes clinging to her skin, half transparent. I wrinkled my nose in disgust and tossed her an outer robe. "Put this on first. Get out here and talk." The night air was cold. Shen Jiwan did not stand on ceremony with me. She pulled the robe on over her wet clothes, then tilted her head back and took a deep, ragged breath. "I know why you're here," she said, looking up at me. "You're looking for my cousin, aren't you, Sister Jiang?" I had no desire to waste time playing guessing games with her. I pulled out my knife and pressed the blade against her delicate neck, my voice cold as ice. "Tell me where he is." Under the moonlight, Shen Jiwan gave me a knowing smile. "You'll never guess. The once high and mighty young master of a noble family is now groveling and begging for the second princess's favor." I was so shocked that my hand trembled slightly. Did she mean what I thought she meant? Had Xie Yao really stooped that low? The woman let out a cold snort. He's already reduced himself to being the princess's gigolo, and yet he still expects me to be his secret lover on the side. I have my own ambitions, you know. Being the princess's mistress is far better than being his. I've heard that Her Royal Highness has quite an appetite and is not at all picky about her lovers. No wonder he had managed to survive even after being condemned to death. He had saved his own skin by selling his body. Did the third prince's consort really not lift a finger to help Xie Yaro? From what I remembered, Xie Miao had always doted on her younger brother. You don't know. Shen Jiwan paused for a moment, then continued, a note of schadenfreude in her voice. When the emperor heard about Xie Yaro's scandalous behavior, he was absolutely furious. He issued a special decree ordering Xie Miao to divorce the third prince and enter a Taoist nunnery to spend the rest of her days in seclusion and penance. Before she left, she arranged for the second princess to meet my cousin. In a daze, I seemed to see a butterfly perched on the top of the peach tree in the courtyard, its wings fluttering gently in the breeze, symbolizing the unpredictable twists and turns of the future. In the memories of my past life, Xie Miao had relied on the support of her powerful family to rise to the position of empress of the entire nation in great splendor. Now, she was not even a prince's consort anymore. And then, another important event from my past life suddenly popped into my mind. It was something I had overheard people talking about with great regret at a banquet I once attended. If only Crown Prince Chen had not died in that tragic accident all those years ago. The court would surely be in a much better state today. We would not have had to cede so many cities to our enemies. The current emperor had many sons, but he had always favored his eldest son, the legitimate heir left behind by Empress Qiansheng, and had long ago chosen him as his successor. Yet the emperor had lived far too long. For a ruler to outlive his prime was not always a blessing. For the crown prince, it meant walking a tightrope. On one hand, he had to endure the watchful suspicion of his aging father. On the other, he had to keep his younger brothers, now all grown men with ambitions of their own, in check. On an ordinary night, the crown prince had suddenly fallen into a coma and passed away 7 days later. The white-haired emperor had wept inconsolably for his departed son, and in the end, it was the third prince, who had always seemed the most unremarkable of the bunch, who had reaped the benefits and seized the throne. Thinking carefully, the timing of the crown prince's illness seemed to coincide with these very days. I cannot let the third prince ascend the throne. If he did, Xie Yaro, his future brother-in-law, would use this connection to claw his way back to power. But what could I do to stop it? In an instant, countless thoughts raced through my mind. Finally, I lowered the knife pressed against Shen Jiwan's neck and asked her one last question. The Xie family's crime of colluding with the enemy and betraying the country, it had something to do with you, didn't it? Not only that, you were once a spy working for the third prince, Shen Jiwan, who had been so composed and in control just a moment ago, paled dramatically. She pulled the golden hairpin from her head and lunged at me, intent on stabbing me, but my bodyguards were quick to react, restraining her before she could get anywhere near me. I stared into her eyes, filled with rage and hatred, and smiled slowly. There's no need to be so impulsive. I have no intention of reporting you to the authorities, at least not for now. What do you want me to do? She asked, her head hanging low, her voice laced with defeat. I answered her firmly, without hesitation, kill Xie Yao. Winter arrived late, and the days slipped by like white rabbits darting through the snow. Before I knew it, large snowflakes were drifting down from the sky. I had just dropped a batch of dumplings into the boiling pot when I saw Aunt Xiao rushing into the kitchen in a panic. Aining, she grabbed my hand and tried to pull me outside. Stop what you're doing. A very important person has come to see you. She asked for you by name. I don't like the look of her, child. You'd better go home and hide for a while. The old cook was not at the academy today. My heart sank as a terrible suspicion dawned on me. My fears were confirmed the moment I stepped outside. A group of palace maids and eunuchs had already surrounded all the exits, blocking my way. On an ornate phoenix carriage parked in front of me sat a plump, imposing woman. She lifted the golden silk curtain and looked at me with a sneer. "Where do you think you're going, little girl?" Then she frowned and patted the young man kneeling at her feet. "Be gentler with your hands." It was none other than the second princess, a woman who had been widowed at a young age and was notorious for her arrogant, tyrannical behavior. I felt a familiar, hateful gaze burning into my back, like a sharp thorn piercing my flesh. I kept my head bowed and stepped forward to pay my respects. "I do not know why your highness has honored me with her presence today. What brings you here?" A deathly silence fell over the courtyard. The second princess looked at me as if she had seen a ghost, her teeth chattering with rage. "You raise your head for this, princess." I lifted my eyes and met the gaze of the man who was kneeling behind the carriage, massaging the princess's legs with a mask covering his face. From his figure alone, I knew it was Xie Yao. For a moment, I did not know whether to worry about my own safety or laugh at his humiliation. The second princess suddenly screamed at the top of her lungs. "Guards, seize her, slash her face to ribbons and beat her to death. Feed her body to the dogs." I stood my ground, refusing to flinch, and said in a calm, steady voice, "Your Highness intends to have me killed without even stating my crime. Is this not a violation of the imperial laws? Are you not afraid of being impeached by the censors?" The woman let out a cold laugh, the jade-inlaid golden hairpins in her hair jangling with the movement of her head. "What laws? I am the law when it comes to dealing with lowly peasants like you." Xie Yao, still rubbing her legs, added fuel to the fire, his voice dripping with malice. "This woman is rude and disrespectful to your highness. Punishing her for such a crime would result in nothing more than a deduction of her salary for a year or two at most." Emboldened by his words, the second princess shrieked even louder. "You useless fools, what are you waiting for? Do as I say." At her command, the palace guards raised their wooden clubs and charged at me, ready to strike. Just as they were about to reach me, a sharp voice rang out from the distance. "Stop!" Aunt Xiao, who had rushed off to fetch help, was following closely behind Wen Heng, sandwiched between a crowd of angry students. Wen Heng was dressed in her purple academy uniform, her long black hair tied up high in a neat bun, her delicate features set in a cold, stern expression. She did not mince her words. "Please return to the palace, Your Highness. The Imperial Academy is a sacred place of learning. Outsiders are not permitted to run amok here." The second princess was so enraged that she kicked Xie Yao hard in the chest, sending the wine cups inside the carriage crashing to the floor with a loud clatter. "You insolent wench from the Wen family, how dare you speak to me in such a tone? If your father, the academy director, were here, I might show the Wen family some respect. But you are nothing but a..." Wen Heng cut her off, her gaze never wavering. "My words are my father's words." He Yuqing stepped forward to shield me with his body, his jaw clenched tightly, his face flushed with anger. "Even the Son of Heaven is not above the law. We are all scholars who have passed the imperial examinations and earned official titles. If your highness insists on killing an innocent weak woman, then I will spill my own blood on the steps of the imperial palace and demand justice from His Majesty the Emperor. That's right, we will never stand by and watch this injustice happen." The other students shouted in unison, their voices echoing through the courtyard, their anger burning hotter than the snow on their shoulders. The sea of blue and purple academy uniforms formed a magnificent, unyielding wall between me and the princess's guards. They might have had different political views and belonged to different academic schools, but they all had one thing in common: they had all eaten the food I cooked. Ice crystals formed on my eyelashes, and my eyes grew wet. I could not tell if it was from the melting ice or from the tears welling up in my eyes. Meanwhile, Xie Yao watched all of this unfold, his eyes filled with bitter resentment. Your Highness. Do not listen to the empty words of these pedantic scholars. But the second princess hesitated. In that split second of hesitation, two figures walked through the main gate of the Imperial Academy. One was a handsome middle-aged man, and the other was the old cook who worked in the academy kitchen. Cough, cough, Your Highness, the old cook said, his hands clasped behind his back, letting out a long, weary sigh. I think you have caused enough trouble for one day. It is time for you to leave, Uncle Wen. The second princess's face paled instantly. She shot me one last look of bitter hatred, but had no choice but to order her servants to turn around and leave. Very well, for Uncle's sake, I will let this matter slide today. With that, the rumors that the old cook was the academy director's father were finally confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt. I cupped my hands in a respectful salute, bowed deeply, and thanked everyone present. Thank you all for coming to my aid today. I am forever in your debt. All right, everyone, the academy director said, his voice warm and kind. He waved at the students, not reprimanding any of them for their boldness. You should all go back to your studies now. Yucheng looked at me with worry in his eyes and did not move. Wenheng stayed behind as well. Once the crowd had dispersed, she turned to her father and asked in a low voice, Father, has the crown prince woken up yet? The academy director did not answer. He only shook his head slowly, his face clouded over with sorrow. A cool breeze blew past, carrying with it a faint, familiar floral scent, a scent that I knew all too well, a scent that had seeped into my bones and haunted my dreams for years. My mind went blank for a moment. I rushed forward impulsively, grabbed the academy director's sleeve, and buried my nose in it, inhaling deeply. Hey, 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 what are you doing? Miss Jiang. The academy director was so shocked that he jumped back in surprise. As I drew closer to him, he suddenly froze, staring at my face in stunned silence. Why do I feel like I've seen you somewhere before? You look so familiar. You remind me of someone. He turned to the old cook and called out to him. Father, come here quickly and take a look at her. The old cook pried his eyes open, scowling so fiercely that his beard stood on end. You unfilial son. Your father is old and his eyesight is failing. I can barely see a thing. I ignored their startled exclamations and let go of the academy director's sleeve, my expression turning grave and serious. Forgive me for being so presumptuous, Director Wen. But may I ask, have you just come from the Eastern Palace? Yes, I have, he replied, looking at me with confusion. Why do you ask? I thought for a moment, then made up my mind to tell them the truth. I think I know why the crown prince fell into a coma. As soon as the words left my mouth, I saw Yucheng's eyes light up with excitement. He rolled up the sleeves of his robe on both arms and held them out to me eagerly. Mistress Jiang, I have sleeves too. You can smell mine if you want. It was the 8th year of my marriage to Xie Yao. I had been confined to my sickbed, my health declining with each passing day. Even the medicine that Zhua had risked her life to obtain could not ease my suffering. Back then, I could only lean against the headboard of my bed, staring through the lattice window at that potted Phalaenopsis orchid, as if catching a glimpse of the world outside. I had thought that my illness was caused by years of overworking myself to manage the household, or perhaps by the chronic blood deficiency I had developed after rolling across that bed of nails. It was not until my deathbed that Xie Yao had thrown the letter of divorce in my face and generously revealed the truth to me. You tore me and Wanwan apart in this life. Even in death, you will never be allowed to enter the Xie family ancestral tomb. Do you know that there is a rare poison in this world that can kill a person without them even realizing it? The seemingly harmless Phalaenopsis orchid, when its fragrance mixes with the smoke from burning candles, it turns into a deadly poison. The scent of the orchid alone was not poisonous. The candles alone were not poisonous either. But when the two combined, they could claim a person's life silently and without a trace. I pulled myself out of the painful memories and told them everything about the Phalaenopsis orchid poison. Everyone's face paled with shock, their expressions growing increasingly grave and solemn. The Crown Prince has always loved flowers and plants, the Academy director said slowly, his voice trembling with concern. Not long ago, on his birthday, Prince Liang sent him a rare and exotic orchid as a gift. Prince Liang was none other than the third prince, the second princess's full brother. The Academy director shook his head, his face filled with unease. This matter is of the utmost importance. We cannot be certain that the orchid in question is indeed the Phalaenopsis orchid. If it was, then a bloody storm was about to erupt within the palace walls. When Heng turned to look at me, her eyes filled with determination. Father, I have a plan. Why don't we let Au disguise herself as a female imperial physician and accompany you to the Eastern Palace to investigate? I nodded my head in agreement without hesitation. As long as the Crown Prince can survive, Xie Yaro's dream of becoming the Emperor's brother-in-law will be nothing but a pipe dream. The Crown Prince had been in a coma for nearly 5 days. There was no time to waste. I handed over the task of finishing the dumplings to someone else and boarded the carriage with director when the old cook was in high spirits. He tossed a few orange peels into the soup and chuckled. It's been ages since I've cooked a proper meal. My old hands are getting rusty. He patted the spatula hanging at his waist, making a loud clanging sound. I thought silently, feeling sorry for the students of the Imperial Academy that day, on the carriage. When Heng slipped a piece of chestnut cake into my hand and winked at me, "Have this to tide you over." "Thank you, don't mention it. If you can save the Crown Prince, our whole family will owe you a debt of gratitude." Seeing the blank look on my face, the young girl cleared her throat and clenched her fist. "The Crown Prince is my maternal cousin once removed. Surely you've heard of Empress Tiansheng. She was my great-aunt from the Wen family. So, you get the picture now." Wow, that was quite the pedigree. No wonder the second princess had backed down so quickly. The sky was dyed a deep dusk as evening fell, a stark contrast to the red walls and green tiles of the palace below. The closer we got to the Eastern Palace, the more imperial guards we saw patrolling the grounds. The entire area was under strict lockdown. Director when presented his official credentials. After a thorough inspection, we were finally allowed to enter. Lanterns cast flickering shadows all over the palace. Clusters of plum blossom branches peeked out from the frost, as if reflecting the heavy hearts of the people inside. The Crown Prince was being cared for in his inner chambers, heavily guarded by layers of soldiers. The eaves outside were lined with a riot of colorful flowers and plants, though much of them were covered by frost and snow in the winter chill. If you listened closely, you could even hear the faint chirping of insects. Inside the palace, however, the air was thick with the bitter, lingering scent of medicinal herbs. A dignified, beautiful woman sat with her eyes closed, praying to the gods and Buddha for her husband's safe recovery. "We pay our respects to your highness," the Crown Princess, standing behind a screen. I followed director when in bowing to her. "Please rise," the Crown Princess said, opening her eyes. "Cousin, what brings you here at such a late hour?" The flickering candlelight illuminated the dark circles under her eyes and the weariness etched on her face. "Your Highness, might I ask you to dismiss your attendants first?" The Crown Princess gave an almost imperceptible nod to the female official beside her. The palace servants filed out like a receding tide, leaving only her most loyal confidants behind, due to the strict separation of men and women in the palace. When Heng stepped forward to convey our purpose to the Crown Princess on our behalf, at the mention of the gravely ill Crown Prince, the Crown Princess's eyes sharpened instantly. She turned to look at me, studying me carefully for a long moment, then nodded firmly. "I will grant you full permission to search every inch of these chambers, even if it means turning the place upside down." I breathed a sigh of relief. I had already observed my surroundings carefully upon entering. The fragrance of the Phalaenopsis orchid did not travel far to poison the crown prince so precisely. The plant could not have been placed too far away from his bed. Yet after searching the entire inner chamber with the servants, we found no trace of the Phalaenopsis orchid anywhere. Had I been wrong all along? But then what about that familiar scent I had smelled on Director Wen's sleeves? Just as the crown princess was beginning to show signs of impatience, I gritted my teeth, strode over to the bed where the crown prince lay, and tore down the gauze curtains hanging above it. "What are you doing?" A strong, unmistakable fragrance of Phalaenopsis orchid hit us like a wave. Before anyone else could react, I pointed to the sachet hanging from the top of the bed frame, my voice ringing clear and crisp. "Your Highness, your humble servant has found it." When Heng exchanged a quick glance with me, then reached up to take down the sachet. Sure enough, inside we found dried, pale purple petals of the Phalaenopsis orchid. I wasted no time in blowing out all the candles around us. I had fought so hard to get a second chance at life, I was not about to let myself be poisoned again. "Guards!" The crown princess clutched the embroidered handkerchief in her hand tightly and stood up abruptly, her eyes blazing with unbridled anger. "Go, report this matter to His Majesty the Emperor at once, and summon the imperial physicians here to treat His Royal Highness immediately." It was the dead of winter, but unbeknownst to me, my back was already soaked with cold sweat, leaving only a profound sense of relief that I had made the right choice. Even Director Wen breathed a sigh of relief, looking at me with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. "You are truly a bold young woman. Were you not afraid of being arrested on the spot as an assassin?" I gave him a bitter smile. I had no other choice. The mere thought of Xie Yarou becoming the Emperor's brother-in-law made my skin crawl. The lanterns lining the palace corridors burned brightly all night long. The imperial physicians were no fools. They had simply been unable to treat the crown prince because they did not know the root cause of his illness. Now that they had a clear diagnosis, they brewed several dark, bitter-tasting medicinal decoctions that very night and administered them to the crown prince. Combining the medicine with acupuncture and bloodletting therapy, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. It was not until the 5th watch of the morning that the crown prince lying on his sickbed finally stirred and slowly opened his eyes. Curious, I leaned over to take a look. Suddenly, I heard a voice cry out, "Mother!" The newly awakened crown prince stumbled out of bed unsteadily, pushed past the crowd of people surrounding him, and threw himself at my feet, hugging my legs tightly as he burst into tears like a lost child. "You've finally come to see me. Your son has missed you so much." Me, everyone else present. I was just about to conclude that the crown prince had lost his wits from the illness when a voice filled with deep sorrow echoed from the palace gates. It was the elderly emperor, come to visit his son. His hair and beard were completely white, and his eagle-like eyes were now glistening with tears. He stumbled forward, supported by his eunuchs. My heart skipped a beat, but strangely enough, I did not feel the slightest bit of fear. Instead, an inexplicable sense of closeness and familiarity washed over me. I remember now, Director Wen suddenly slapped his forehead, his eyes lighting up with realization. "It's Aunt, Miss Jiang. You look exactly like the portrait of my great-aunt Empress Qianxing." "No, she is not her." The elderly emperor shook his head, letting out a long, mournful sigh. "Au would never have such soft, gentle eyes. She has long since given up on me. Why would she ever come back?" By this time, the crown prince had also come to his senses. He stared down at his knees in disbelief. "So, I am not in the underworld." I awkwardly took a step back and cleared my throat. "Your Royal Highness, perhaps you should get up first." He slowly lowered his head to look at his knees. Silence hung heavy in the air like a shroud over the crown prince that night. The news that the third prince had bribed a palace eunuch to assassinate the crown prince spread like wildfire throughout the palace in no time. Perhaps the third prince had been so confident that his scheme would remain hidden forever that the eunuch still had a large stash of dried Phalaenopsis orchid petals in his quarters, along with a letter he had written to his master boasting of his